A new report from Shane Harris at the Wall Street Journal indicates that there is a very clear tie between Russian hackers and Michael Flynn. Now, of course, when stories like this come up, people roll their eyes because the Russia story has been a slow and steady drip of some evidence, but nothing too clear, or at least clear enough. However, this report does show a clear tie, and I'm gonna walk you through it. Now, it has to do with Peter W. Smith. He is a Republican opposition researcher, and apparently he was very much in favor of getting his hands on Hillary's emails. And he was under the assumption that Russian hackers close to the Russian government were likely to have those emails. And so he sprang into action. His project began over Labor Day weekend of 2016 when Mr. Smith, a private equity executive from Chicago active in Republican politics, said he assembled a group of technology experts, lawyers, and a Russian-speaking investigator based in Europe to acquire emails the group theorized might have been stolen from the private server Mrs. Clinton used as Secretary of State. The Wall Street Journal continues that the operation Mr. Smith described is consistent with information that has been examined by US investigators probing Russian interference in the elections. Now, investigators have examined reports from intelligence agencies that describe Russian hackers discussing how to obtain emails from Mrs. Clinton's server and then transmit them to Mr. Flynn via an intermediary, according to US officials with knowledge of the intelligence. Now, I'm gonna give you exact details of how Flynn is involved, how this all worked out, where did the emails go, who did they give them to? But before I do so, I think it's important for you to understand how the Wall Street Journal got this information. Now, Shane Harris was interviewed by Rachel Maddow last night on MSNBC, and here's what he had to say about how he got his hands on this story. Take a look.
My knowledge of what he was involved in predated my first contact with him, and reached out to me, and we had a conversation about what he was doing, which was fairly extensive, and obviously he's quoted in the story. And it was at that point that when we suspended that conversation that I continued doing reporting and assumed in this case, perhaps incorrectly, that I would have the chance to go back and discuss this further with Peter Smith. But obviously he died about 10 days after I spoke with him. So it was on the record. He reached out to me. He was in no way ashamed of what he had done. He was actually quite proud of it and fervently believed that these emails would eventually surface. He really believed that he was at the end, as he described it. He thought that he was at nearly the last chapter of a long saga, and that soon these emails would come to light, and that he would ultimately be vindicated in this quest that he was on.
So to give you a little bit of context, who the hell is this guy? He's actually very rich. He's a private equity executive. So he's been involved in Republican politics for a long time, not as someone who's running, but as someone who's financing the politics. Now, if you're a private equity executive, you might like some tax cuts. So, and obviously he's very energized about attacking not just Democrats in general, but specifically the Clintons. Back in the 1990s, he helped publicize the Arkansas state trooper claims against Bill Clinton and his trysts with other women. So he's been going after the Clintons for a long time. So when Hillary Clinton talked about the vast right-wing conspiracy, that was true. There was these guys like Mr. Smith sitting there financing all this stuff to attack the Clintons behind the scenes because they wanted more tax cuts and deregulation, etc. So this guy's back and in his last gasp before he dies. If we were right wingers, we'd have all sorts of conspiracy theories on how he died. Okay.
Right. I mean, he was in his 80s. I don't know.
He was 81. Yeah. There's no theories. Okay. So anyway, he goes and brags to the Wall Street Journal. By the way, I was trying to get the deleted emails that Hillary Clinton said were personal, but I think actually showed that the Arkansas state troopers did do it. Whatever conspiracy that they were on, yada. So that's how all this came about. That he's bragging about it.
He's bragging about it to this reporter, and keep in mind that Harris had been digging around for information about the Russia story for a while, and so Smith was aware of that and went to him immediately. Now, in the interview with the Journal, Mr. Smith said he and his colleagues found 5 groups of hackers who claimed to possess Mrs. Clinton's deleted emails, including 2 groups he determined were Russians. He said, and this is an exact quote from Peter Smith, "We knew the people who had these were probably around the Russian government." Mr. Smith said after vetting batches of emails offered to him by hacker groups last fall, he couldn't be sure enough of their authenticity to leak them himself. He said, "We told all the groups to give them to WikiLeaks." Now, WikiLeaks claims we didn't get those emails, we didn't publish those emails. I don't know what the truth is there, but that's what Mr. Smith is alleging. Now, in conversations with members of his circle and with others, he tried to recruit help or people to help him. The GOP operative, Peter W. Smith, implied that he was working with retired Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, at the time a senior advisor to then candidate Donald Trump. Now, Trump's camp is saying, well, I mean, if Flynn was in cahoots with Smith, that was his right as a private citizen to do so, except he is a campaign advisor. He is working for the Trump campaign. And so when we have discussions about collusion with Russia, this sounds like or looks like and appears to be collusion with Russia.
And just to be clear, that collusion would be through a foreign government hack an American's emails so that we can get them and release them. I mean, pretty sure that's a crime.
In one Smith email reviewed by the Journal, intended to entice outside experts to join his work, he offered to make introductions to Mr. Flynn's son, Michael G. Flynn, who worked as chief of staff in his father's company. Mr. Smith's email mentioned the son among a small number of people, or a small number of other people, he said were helping. Another recruiting email seen by the Journal included links to the websites and LinkedIn profiles of people purportedly working with the Smith team. At the top of that list was the name and website of Flynn Intel, which Mr. Flynn set up after his 2014 firing as director of the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Guy's son is so incompetent. I wouldn't be surprised if his son ended up playing a role in whatever misfortune, legal misfortune befalls the father, if any.
So, look, I think the leaked emails, honestly, to me, are the least interesting part of the Russian story. So,
I don't care about the emails. I think
I know. Hold on. Just so to the Democrats, that's like the worst part of the story. Like, oh my God, they leaked our emails. The damn Russians. I don't know that that's even illegal. I mean, if they broke into your computers, I guess that's illegal, and you
can't steal somebody's.
Yeah. All right. But would a political opponent use public email?
Yeah, once they're stolen, then they're fair game.
Yeah. So, and if that was the big scheme, like we're gonna break into Podesta's computer and we're gonna leak these emails, nobody's gonna. That's gonna be nothing. That's a big nothing burger.
Well, I mean, I disagree. That was not a nothing burger. It was a significant factor in the campaign. I mean,
I know, but they're not going to get anybody on that. You're not going to charge the president with, you liked that they broke into Podesta's computer.
No,
it's not a thing.
I don't think. Look, I think that there are Democrats who want to impeach Trump, and that's why they harp on this Russia story and the Russia story alone. And I think that's a huge miscalculation. I think they should focus. They don't have to stop focusing on this, but they should focus on other things as well. But my concern is not about poor Hillary or the email. I don't care. I think you guys know how I felt about Hillary during the election. My concern is understanding if there were foreign actors at play, if there was any type of collusion with one campaign with foreign actors, right? And if there was, and it's proven, first of all, there should be consequences. If it is completely proven that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia, there's no question about that. But more importantly, what are we gonna do in the future to prevent this from happening? That's what I care about the most.
So to finish my thought, the part I do care about is, if you've got this Republican backer going and purposely trying to get emails that he knows are stolen, so they're not public yet,
right?
Okay,
yeah.
He is going to say, and he thinks, according to his own admission, that he thinks there's a good chance the Russians stole them. And being a good patriotic American, he thinks, oh, good, the Russians stole something really important from us. Let's help them publicize that. So then I'm going to enlist Flynn, who is not, You're part of the campaign, Mike Flynn. You don't get to say, oh, I did that as part of the campaign. All the illegal stuff I did was as a private citizen. That's not how it works, okay? You're on the Trump campaign unequivocally. And you're going to this rich Republican and going, can you find a way to, you know how you bribe politicians all the time legally? Can you go find a way to bribe people to give us those stolen emails that the Russians stole from us? Not so that we can punish remember, Mike Flynn used to run the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was supposed to be the one checking in on the Russians. But he says, oh great, the Russians stole from us maybe. Let's go get those and use it for our political purposes. That I do have a problem with. Membership helps fund the Young Turks. You know one great thing about that? That means we're not accountable to anyone but you guys. That's why we're strong together, because we built this show around you. Come build it even bigger and better at tytnetwork.com/join.